The morning air in Ashford Valley carried the smell of pine and wood smoke, the way it always did in late October. The mountains rose up on all sides of the small town, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. It was Saturday, which meant the town square would be full of people by mid-morning, farmers bringing in the last of their harvest, women trading preserves and gossip, children running between the market stalls while their mothers shopped. But this Saturday was different. Word had spread through the valley like wildfire over the past week. Thomas Brennan was calling in a debt, and he was doing it publicly. Jin Park sat on the wooden steps of his cousin's cabin, feeling the weak autumn sun on his face. He'd been awake since before dawn, listening to Thomas moving around inside, muttering to himself. Jin knew what today meant. He'd known it was coming for months now, ever since Thomas started complaining louder about the cost of keeping him. Another mouth to feed, Thomas would say during dinner, his voice sharp with resentment. Can't work, can't see, can't do nothing useful. Jin never responded to these comments. What could he say? It was all true in a way. He couldn't see. Not since the explosion in Korea 3 years ago. The doctor said shrapnel had destroyed his optic nerves, said he was lucky to be alive. Some days Jin wasn't sure they were right about the lucky part. He heard the cabin door creak open behind him. Thomas's heavy footsteps crossed the porch. Get up, Thomas said. Time to go. Jin stood slowly, reaching for the walking stick that leaned against the railing. His fingers found it right where he'd left it. He'd learned to be precise about where he put things. Had to be, living in darkness. Am I to bring anything? Jin asked quietly. Thomas laughed, a bitter sound. Bring anything? Boy, you don't own nothing worth bringing. Come on now, don't make this harder than it needs to be. They walked into town together, though calling it together was generous. Thomas stayed several paces ahead, like he didn't want people to think they were actually walking side by side. Jin followed the sound of his cousin's boots on the dirt road, his stick tapping a rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. Other people were on the road too. Jin could hear their conversations die out as he passed. Could feel their eyes on him. Nobody said hello. Nobody ever did anymore. The town square was already crowded when they arrived. Jin could tell by the noise. Dozens of voices mixing together. The creak of wagon wheels, a dog barking somewhere. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery, tobacco smoke, horse manure. His other senses had gotten sharper since losing his sight. It didn't make up for what he'd lost, but it helped him understand the world around him. Stay here, Thomas ordered, and Jin heard him walk away toward the center of the square. Jin stood where he'd been left, gripping his walking stick. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Hated that feeling more than anything. He'd been a soldier once. Had carried a rifle and led other men. Now he couldn't even cross a room without counting his steps. The conversations around him had shifted. People were gathering closer, forming a circle. Jin's stomach tightened. This was it, neighbors, friends. Thomas's voice rang out loud. He was using his public voice, the one he put on when he wanted to sound important. You all know me. Know I'm a fair man. A Christian man. When my cousin here came back from the war, injured and helpless, I took him in. Did my duty as family. Jin's jaw clenched. Duty. As if Thomas had done it out of kindness and not because the Army's small disability payment came with Jin. For 3 years I fed him, clothed him, kept a roof over his head, Thomas continued. 3 years of my own resources, my own hard work. But times are lean, friends. The harvest wasn't good this year. Winter's coming and it'll be a hard one. I've got my own family to think about. My own children to feed. There was a murmur through the crowd. Jin couldn't tell if it was sympathetic or critical. So I'm here today to settle accounts, Thomas said. Jin Park owes me for his care. Room and board for 3 years. Medical supplies, clothing, food. By my calculation, that comes to about $400. $400. Jin's chest went tight. He'd never see that kind of money in his lifetime. Not now, Thomas knew it too. This wasn't about collecting a debt. This was about getting rid of him. Now Jin can't pay that debt, Thomas went on. He's got nothing. Can't work neither, being blind. So I'm proposing what our grandparents used to do in hard times. Indentured service. Someone takes on Jin's debt and he works it off for them. 3 years labor for 3 years debt. That seems fair to me. The crowd was silent now. Jin could feel the weight of their stares. Some people probably felt sorry for him. Others probably thought Thomas was right. Either way, he was being traded like a piece of furniture. Anyone willing to take on this arrangement? Thomas called out. I'm a reasonable man. We can discuss terms. Silence. Long, painful silence. Jin wanted to disappear. Wanted to be anywhere but standing in that square. Being auctioned off like livestock. His face burned with shame. Come now, Thomas said, and Jin could hear the nervousness creeping into his voice. That's 3 years of labor. He's strong enough even if he can't see. Can do simple work. Still nothing. Jin realized with sick certainty that nobody wanted him. Why would they? A blind man was a burden, not an asset. Thomas would probably have to take him to the county poorhouse, and everyone would know he'd failed to get rid of his obligation. I'll take him. The voice was clear and calm. A woman's voice. Jin didn't recognize it. The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like ripples on water. Mrs. Chen? Thomas sounded as surprised as Jin felt. You're interested in this arrangement? I am, the woman said. She had a slight accent, but her English was perfect. Jin heard footsteps approaching. Light steps, measured and confident. Well, Thomas said, recovering. That's fine, Mrs. Chen. Very Christian of you. But you understand the terms? $400 debt, 3 years service? I understand perfectly, the woman replied. However, I won't be treating Mr. Park as an indentured servant. I'll pay you $200 now and he'll work at my store as a regular employee. Room and board provided, naturally. There was a pause. Jin could almost feel Thomas calculating. 200? Thomas said. But the debt is 400. The debt is what you say it is, the woman said, her voice firm but not unkind. I doubt you've kept precise records. I'm offering you $200, which is more than fair. Take it or leave it. Jin heard the coins before he heard Thomas's answer, the distinctive clink of silver dollars being counted into a hand. Well, Thomas said slowly, I suppose that's acceptable. Mrs. Chen, you've got yourself a worker. Jin, you'll be going with Mrs. Chen now. Just like that. 3 years with Thomas finished. Jin didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. He didn't even know who this Mrs. Chen was. A hand touched his elbow gently. Mr. Park? I'm Margaret Chen. Shall we go? Her touch was light, respectful. Not grabbing or pulling. Just guiding. My things, Jin started to say. We'll send for them later, Margaret said. For now, let's get you somewhere more comfortable. As they walked away from the square, Jin could hear the whispers starting up behind them. Louder now that they thought he was out of earshot. What's she thinking? A widow woman taking in a strange man? And a blind one at that. What use could he be? There's something not right about it. Margaret's hand stayed steady on his elbow, guiding him around obstacles he couldn't see. She didn't speak until they'd left the square behind and were on a quieter street. That must have been difficult, she said simply. Jin didn't trust himself to speak. His throat was tight with emotions he couldn't name. Shame, relief, fear, gratitude all mixed together. My store and home are just ahead, Margaret continued. About 200 more paces. There's a step up at the door, I'll warn you. The floor inside is level, wood planks. She was describing everything, giving him information he needed. Not many people did that. Most just assumed he'd figure it out by bumping into things. They reached the building and Margaret was true to her word. Step up about 6 inches, she said, and Jin found it easily with his stick. The inside of the building smelled like dried herbs, leather, and soap. A general store, clearly. Jin could hear the creak of floorboards under his feet, the rustle of fabric somewhere to his left. This is the store, Margaret explained. We'll walk through it to get to the living quarters in back. Let me guide you. They moved slowly through the space, Margaret describing each section as they passed. Dry goods on the right, fabric and notions on the left. Counter straight ahead, we'll go around it to the right. Jin tried to picture it all in his mind, building a map of this new place. It was what he did now. Mental maps of everywhere he went. A door opened and the quality of the air changed. More personal smells now. Cooking, wood smoke, lavender. This is the kitchen, Margaret said. Table in the center, chairs around it. Stove on the left wall, sink on the right. Would you like to sit? Jin nodded and Margaret guided him to a chair. He sat carefully, his hands finding the edge of the table. Solid oak, smooth from years of use. I'm going to make tea, Margaret said. Are you hungry? I don't want to be trouble, Jin said quietly. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her. It's not trouble to feed someone, Margaret replied. He heard her moving around the kitchen with easy familiarity. Water being poured, the stove being stoked. I imagine you haven't eaten much today. She was right. Thomas hadn't offered breakfast. Margaret worked in silence for a few minutes. Then Jin heard a plate being set on the table in front of him. Bread and butter. Some cold chicken, an apple, Margaret said. Fork at 3 o'clock, cup of tea at 1 o'clock. Using clock positions to help him locate things. Jin felt something loosen in his chest. This woman understood what he needed without him having to explain. Thank you, he managed. You're welcome. The food was good. Simple but well prepared. Jin ate slowly. Carefully, the way he'd learned to eat without making a mess. He was acutely aware of Margaret moving around the kitchen, but she didn't hover. Didn't watch him eat like some people did, waiting for him to spill or fumble. When he finished, Margaret took his plate. Let me show you where you'll be staying. They went through another door down a short hallway. 3 doors on the left, Margaret narrated. First is a washroom. Second is my room. Third will be yours. She opened the 3rd door and guided him inside. It's small but comfortable. Bed against the far wall, dresser to the right, chair by the window. Everything is clean. I'll help you learn the layout properly tomorrow, but for now you must be exhausted. Jin was exhausted, more emotionally than physically. The day had drained something essential from him. Mrs. Chen, he started, his voice rough. Why did you do this? Take me on? There was a pause. Then Margaret said simply, because you needed help and I need help. That seemed like a good enough reason. But people will talk. People always talk, Margaret said, and he could hear a smile in her voice. I stopped worrying about that a long time ago. Rest now, Mr. Park. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to work together. After she left, closing the door softly behind her, Jin sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, the blankets clean. Through the window he couldn't see. He could hear the sounds of the town going about its business. For the first time in 3 years, Jin felt something he'd almost forgotten. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The smallest spark of hope that perhaps his life wasn't over after all. He lay back on the bed, his hands behind his head, and stared up at the ceiling he couldn't see. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to navigate. But tonight he was warm and fed and safe. It was more than he'd had that morning. And for now, that was enough. Jin woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then it came back to him. The auction. Margaret Chen. The clean bed he was lying in now. Sunlight was warming his face through the window. He could tell it was well past dawn. At Thomas's house, he'd been expected up before sunrise, feeling his way through morning chores in the dark. Nobody had let him sleep in for 3 years. There was a soft knock on his door. Mr. Park, are you awake? Margaret's voice was gentle. Yes, Jin called out, sitting up quickly. I'm sorry, I should have been up earlier. Why? Margaret asked through the door. It's Sunday. The store is closed. Take your time. Breakfast is ready whenever you are, Sunday. Jin had lost track of the days. He made his way to the washroom first, counting his steps carefully. 7 steps from his door, turn right. Margaret had described it last night, but he needed to learn it with his body. Inside the washroom, he found everything arranged with thought. Towel hanging at shoulder height on the right. Soap in a dish on the left side of the sink. Basin of water already filled. When he emerged, cleaned up and dressed in the same worn clothes from yesterday, he followed the smell of breakfast to the kitchen. 10 steps down the hallway, turn left, 6 more steps forward. Good morning, Margaret said. Coffee? Please, Jin said, finding the chair he'd sat in last night. His chair now, apparently. She set a cup in front of him. 2 o'clock position, she said, then added breakfast plates. Eggs at 12, bacon at 3, toast at 9. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Jin was used to tense, angry silence at mealtimes. This was different, peaceful. I've been thinking about how we might work together, Margaret said after a while. The store needs organizing. Inventory needs counting. There's mending and sorting in the back room that I've been putting off for months. Would you be willing to try some of those tasks? I'll try anything, Jin said. But I'm slow, and I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Margaret said simply. We'll figure out what works. After breakfast, Margaret led him on a tour of the store. A proper tour this time. Not the quick walkthrough from last night. She moved slowly, describing everything in detail. The store is rectangular, she began. About 30 feet deep, 20 feet wide. Front door is centered on the short wall. Counter runs along the right side, about 12 feet long. That's where I do business, keep the till, wrap purchases. Jin listened carefully, building the picture in his mind. Left side has shelving floor to ceiling. That's where I keep fabric, thread, buttons, ribbons, all the sewing notions. The middle of the floor has tables with dry goods, flour, sugar, salt, beans, rice, things people buy regularly. They walk the space together, Margaret guiding his hand to touch different displays, letting him feel the height of shelves, the width of aisles, the texture of different goods. Back corner has tools and hardware, nails, hammers, rope, that sort of thing. And behind the counter through that door is the storage room. The storage room was smaller, packed with crates and barrels. This is where I need the most help, Margaret admitted. I've lost track of what I have. Can't find things when customers ask. It's a mess, honestly. Jin ran his hand over a stack of crates. I could organize it, he said slowly. If you tell me what's in each container, I could arrange them by type. Create a system. Could you remember it all? Margaret asked, curious rather than doubtful. My memory got better after I lost my sight, Jin explained. Had to. I remember sounds, textures, where things are placed. I could do this, and he did. Over the next week, Jin and Margaret worked together to transform the storage room. She would open a crate and describe its contents. Jin would feel the items, noting their weight, their texture, their shape. Then he'd decide where they should go. Canning jars, all the same size, stack them along the left wall, he'd say. Or, different size nails, we need to separate them into smaller containers that I can tell apart by touch. Margaret followed his suggestions, and slowly the chaos became order. Jin created a system where he could find anything by memory and touch. Large items on the bottom, smaller items up higher, similar goods grouped together, everything in its place. This is remarkable, Margaret said one afternoon, watching Jin navigate the storage room without hesitation. You're faster than I am now. Jin felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Pride, usefulness, purpose. But it wasn't just the work that was changing him. It was Margaret herself. She treated him like a person, not a burden. When he made mistakes, she didn't sigh with frustration or make comments about his blindness. She just helped him figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. She described things without being asked. When customers came in, she'd quietly tell him who they were, what they looked like, what they usually bought. Building his understanding of the community around him, and she talked to him. Really talked, not the careful, pitying conversations people had with him at Thomas's house. Real conversations about real things. One evening, after the store closed, they sat in the kitchen with tea. Jin had learned the rhythm of the day now. Morning inventory, midday customers, evening bookkeeping, then this quiet hour before bed. Why did you really take me on? Jin asked. The question had been on his mind all week. You could have hired someone who could see, someone who'd be more help. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Jin heard her cup touch the saucer, a soft clink. My husband died 2 years ago, she said finally. Heart attack. One morning he was fine, by noon he was gone. I've been running this store alone since then. I'm sorry, Jin said, thank you, but that's not really the answer to your question. She paused. When Henry and I first came to this town, people weren't welcoming. Henry was Chinese, I'm Chinese. People didn't like that we wanted to open a store. Didn't like that we married outside our community. They made things hard for us. Jin nodded slowly. He understood that kind of rejection. Eventually we proved ourselves, Margaret continued. Worked hard, treated people fairly, became part of the town. But I never forgot how it felt to be unwanted. To have people look at you and see only what's different. What's wrong? And you saw me standing in that square, Jin said quietly. I saw a man being treated like he was worthless because of something beyond his control, Margaret said. I saw people looking at you the way they used to look at me. And I thought, if I can help, why wouldn't I? Jin felt his throat tighten. You're a good person, Mrs. Chen. Margaret, she corrected gently. And I'm not particularly good. I'm just trying to do what's right. Besides, you've made yourself useful. The store hasn't run this smoothly in months. It was true. Together they developed routines that worked. Margaret would handle customers while Jin organized inventory, prepared orders, kept the back room running efficiently. When the store was quiet, she'd teach him the bookkeeping system, letting him feel the different textures of coins, count them by touch and sound. He learned to fold fabric by feeling the weave, to portion out dry goods by weight, his hands becoming sensitive scales, to identify regular customers by their footsteps and voices before they even spoke. That's Mrs. Patterson, He'd whisper to Margaret when he heard the door open. "She'll want baking soda and those peppermints you keep behind the counter." Margaret would smile, impressed, and sure enough, Jin would be right. By the end of the second week, Jin could navigate the entire store and living quarters without his walking stick. He'd memorized every step, every obstacle, every layout. The store had become a map in his mind, as clear as if he could see it. But more than that, something else was happening. He was starting to feel alive again. At Thomas's house, he'd felt like a ghost. Present, but not really there. Existing, but not living. Here with Margaret, he had purpose. Had work that mattered. Had someone who valued what he could do instead of focusing on what he couldn't. One evening, Jin was in the storage room doing final inventory before bed. He heard the back door open and close. Margaret's footsteps, but faster than usual. Almost rushed. "Everything all right?" he called out. Margaret appeared in the doorway. He could hear tension in the way she was breathing. "I went to the market," she said. "There's talk in town about us. About this arrangement." Jin's stomach dropped. He'd known this was coming. Had been waiting for it. "What kind of talk?" "The usual kind," Margaret said, trying to sound casual but not quite managing it. That it's not proper for a widow woman to have a man living in her house. That there must be something inappropriate going on. "That you're taking advantage of my charity." Jin set down the box he was holding. "I should leave. Go to the county home. I won't let you be disrespected because of me." "Absolutely not," Margaret said firmly. "Jin, I don't care what narrow-minded people think. This is my home, my store, my decision. But your reputation, my reputation survived marrying Henry. It'll survive this too." Her voice softened. "Unless you want to leave. If you're uncomfortable here, that's different. But don't leave because of gossip." Jin shook his head. "I don't want to leave. This is the first place I've felt human since I came back from the war. But I don't want to cause you trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Margaret insisted. "The people talking are causing trouble." "There's a difference." They stood in silence for a moment. Jin could hear Margaret moving closer, could sense her standing just a few feet away. "I've been thinking," Margaret said. "About my husband, about this store, about everything. After Henry died, I was so focused on just surviving. Just getting through each day. But these past 2 weeks working with you, I've remembered what it feels like to have a partner. Someone to share the work with, to talk to plan with." "Margaret," Jin started. "Let me finish," she said gently. "I'm not saying this right. What I mean is, you've helped me as much as I've helped you. Maybe more. This store is running better than it has in 2 years. I'm not lonely anymore. I'm not just surviving, I'm actually living again." Jin felt emotion welling up in his chest. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "For 3 years I felt useless. Felt like a burden on everyone around me. But here with you I feel like I matter. Like I can still contribute something." "You do matter," Margaret said firmly. "And not because of what you can do for the store. You matter because you're a good person, Jin. Because you're kind and patient and hardworking. Because you treat me with respect and consideration. Those things matter more than inventory and bookkeeping." Jin didn't know what to say. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as broken, as less than whole, that hearing Margaret speak of him this way was almost overwhelming. "The gossip will get worse before it gets better," Margaret said after a moment. "Some people might stop shopping here. But I've dealt with worse. We'll face it together, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Jin said without hesitation. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it together." That night, lying in his bed, Jin thought about everything that had changed in just 2 weeks. He'd gone from being sold off like property to being a valued partner in a business, from feeling worthless to feeling necessary. But more than that, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever in that explosion in Korea. He'd found hope. Found a reason to get up in the morning that went beyond mere survival. The gossip Margaret warned him about did come, and it came hard. But that night, Jin didn't know that yet. That night, he just felt grateful. Grateful for the warm bed, the full stomach, the sense of purpose, and grateful most of all for Margaret Chen, who'd seen him standing in that town square and decided he was worth saving. He fell asleep with a small smile on his face, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The first real sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. 3 weeks after Jin had moved in with Margaret, Jin was in the storage room, organizing a new shipment of supplies that had come in the day before. His hands moved confidently over the boxes, identifying contents by weight and the sound things made when he shook them gently. Coffee beans had a distinctive rattle. Sugar shifted differently than salt. After weeks of practice, he could tell most things apart without even opening the containers. He heard the front door of the store open. The bell above it gave a cheerful jingle that contrasted sharply with the voices that followed. "Margaret Chen, we need to speak with you." The voice was male, formal, and carried the weight of someone used to being listened to. Jin recognized it after a moment. "Mayor Hutchins." "Good morning, Mayor," Margaret said. Her voice was pleasant, but Jin could detect a slight edge to it. She knew this wasn't a friendly visit. "How can I help you?" "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" Another voice asked. This one was older, more nasal. "Deacon Walsh from the Presbyterian Church." "We can talk right here," Margaret replied calmly. "The store is open for business. I can't leave the counter." Jin moved closer to the doorway between the storage room and the main store, staying out of sight but listening carefully. "Very well," the mayor said. He cleared his throat in that way people do when they're about to say something uncomfortable. "Mrs. Chen, the town council has received complaints about your living situation." "My living situation?" Margaret's voice stayed level, but Jin could hear the steel underneath. "The fact that you have a man living in your home," Deacon Walsh said, "an unmarried man. It's not proper, Mrs. Chen. Surely you can see how it looks." "How what looks exactly?" Margaret asked. There was an uncomfortable pause. Jin could picture the men shifting their weight, not wanting to say outright what they were implying. "A widow woman and an unmarried man living under the same roof," the mayor finally said. "It raises questions. Creates talk. Several families have mentioned they're uncomfortable shopping here now." "Because I gave a job to a war veteran who needed help," Margaret said. "Because I provided room and board to someone with nowhere else to go." "It's not about charity," Deacon Walsh cut in. "It's about propriety, about maintaining standards in this community. There are places for people like him. The county home, church shelters. He doesn't need to be living here with you. People like him." The words hit Jin like a physical blow. He'd heard variations of that phrase his whole life. People like him, meaning Chinese, meaning veterans who came back damaged, meaning blind men who couldn't pull their weight. "Mr. Park works here," Margaret said, her voice getting firmer. "He's an employee. This building houses both my store and my residence. Many shop owners live above or behind their businesses. There's nothing unusual about that." "It's different when it's a woman alone and a man," the mayor insisted. "Surely you understand our concern." "What I understand," Margaret said slowly, "is that this town had no problem when my husband and I ran this store together. No problem when other shop owners had live-in help. But now that I'm employing someone you consider beneath your standards, suddenly there's concern about propriety." Jin heard the mayor make a huffing sound. "This isn't about prejudice, Mrs. Chen, isn't it?" Margaret challenged. "Mr. Park is a decorated war veteran. He served this country, lost his sight defending it. He works hard, causes no trouble, bothers no one. But because he's blind, because he's different, you want him removed from my home. Tell me how that's not prejudice." "We're trying to help you," Deacon Walsh said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Jin's hands clench into fists. "Your reputation is at stake here. As community leaders, it's our duty to guide you toward proper behavior." "My reputation," Margaret repeated. "Let me be very clear, gentlemen. My reputation belongs to me. I'll manage it as I see fit. Mr. Park stays. This conversation is over." "Now, Mrs. Chen, be reasonable," the mayor started. "I am being reasonable," Margaret interrupted. "I'm running my business, employing someone who needs work and harming no one. If certain people choose not to shop here because of their own narrow-mindedness, that's their choice. But I won't be bullied into throwing a good man onto the street to satisfy gossip." "This isn't just gossip," Deacon Walsh said, his voice hardening. "This is about community standards. If you insist on this inappropriate arrangement, there will be consequences. People won't shop here. Your business will suffer. Is your stubbornness really worth that?" "Yes," Margaret said without hesitation. "It is. Now, unless you're here to make a purchase, I have work to do." There was a tense silence. Then Jin heard footsteps moving toward the door. The bell jangled as the men left. Jin waited a moment before emerging from the storage room. Margaret was standing behind the counter, her hands pressed flat against the wooden surface. She looked calm, but Jin could see the tension in her shoulders. "You heard all that," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I did," Jin admitted. "Margaret, they're right about one thing. This will hurt your business. People will stop coming." "Some people will," Margaret said. Some people already have. Mrs. Patterson hasn't been in since last week. The Henderson family sent their son to buy supplies instead of coming themselves. I've noticed. Then why? Because it's wrong, Margaret said firmly, turning to face him. It's wrong to throw someone out because of what other people think. It's wrong to let fear and prejudice make your decisions for you. My husband and I faced this kind of pressure when we first came here. If we'd given in every time someone disapproved, we never would have built anything. Jin moved closer to the counter, his hand finding its familiar edge. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've built. You're not the reason, Margaret said. Their prejudice is the reason. There's a difference, Jin. Don't take responsibility for other people's closed minds. Before Jin could respond, the door opened again. This time the bell's jingle was followed by lighter footsteps. A woman's voice uncertain, Mrs. Chen. Are you open? Of course, Mrs. Liu, Margaret said, her voice warming. Come in. How can I help you today? Mrs. Liu, Jin had learned, was one of the few other Chinese families in town. She ran a laundry service with her husband. I need thread, Mrs. Liu said, and I heard. That is, people are talking. Let them talk, Margaret said gently. The thread is over here. What color do you need? As Margaret helped Mrs. Liu, Jin heard the woman lower her voice. You're very brave, she said quietly. What you're doing, standing up to them. My husband and I, we admire it. But we're worried for you. Don't worry, Margaret assured her. We'll be fine. But as the days passed, it became clear that things weren't fine. Regular customers stopped coming. The store that had been busy every morning grew quiet. Some people crossed the street when they saw Margaret coming. Others pretended not to see her at all. Jin kept working, kept organizing, kept doing everything he could to help. But he felt the weight of it. Felt the silence where conversation used to be. Felt Margaret's worry even though she tried to hide it. One afternoon, about a week after the mayor's visit, Jin was sweeping the store floor when he heard voices outside. Young voices, teenage boys by the sound of them. That's where the blind man lives, one of them said, loud enough to be heard through the window. My pa says he's taking advantage of the widow lady, another voice added. Taking advantage? He's blind. What's he gonna do? Laughter, cruel and thoughtless the way teenage boys could be. I heard he's not really blind, that it's all an act, more laughter. Jin's hand tightened on the broom handle. Should test it, the first voice said. Throw something at him, see if he dodges. Jin heard footsteps coming toward the door. His heart started pounding. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before. People who wanted to test him to prove he was faking somehow. But before the boys could enter, another voice cut through their laughter. Older, authoritative. You boys have somewhere else to be. Silence. Then shuffling footsteps moving away quickly. The door opened and Jin heard heavy boots crossing the floor. A working man's boots, worn leather. Mr. Park? The voice said. Name's Robert Hayes. I have a farm north of town. Mr. Hayes, Jin said carefully. I want to apologize, Robert said. For those boys, for the way folks have been treating you and Mrs. Chen. It's not right. Jin wasn't sure what to say. An apology was the last thing he'd expected. My son served in Korea too, Robert continued. Came back different. Has nightmares, can't stand loud noises. Some days he can barely get out of bed. But he's still my son. Still deserving of respect. He paused. You served your country. Lost your sight doing it. Way I see it, this town owes you gratitude, not gossip. Thank you, Jin managed. Mrs. Chen around? She went to the mill for flour, Jin said. Should be back soon. I'll wait if that's all right. Need to place an order anyway. Robert became a regular after that, and slowly, very slowly, a few others followed. Not many, but enough to notice. Old Mr. Chen from the Chinese restaurant started stopping by, always making a point to greet Jin by name. The blacksmith's wife came in one morning, made her purchases, then looked Jin straight in the face and said, Thank you for your service, young man. But for every person who showed support, there were 3 who turned away. The Sunday after Robert's visit, someone threw a rock through the store window. It shattered glass all over the fabric display. Margaret and Jin spent the morning cleaning it up, picking shards out of bolts of cloth. Neither of them said much. What was there to say? That afternoon, they sat in the kitchen with tea, the boarded-up window visible from where they sat. I'm sorry, Jin said quietly. Stop apologizing, Margaret replied, but her voice was tired. This isn't your fault. It's happening because of me. It's happening because people are afraid of change. Afraid of anything different. Margaret set down her cup. Jen, I need to tell you something. The store's savings are getting low. The broken window, the lost business, it's adding up. I might need to dip into my personal savings soon. Jen felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. I should go to the county home. Before you lose everything. And if you go, what will that teach this town? Margaret asked. That bullying works? That if they make life hard enough, people will give in? I won't do it, Jen, I won't. But your store is just a building with goods in it, Margaret interrupted. It's important, yes. But it's not more important than standing up for what's right. My husband taught me that. We almost lost this place twice in the early years because we wouldn't compromise our principles. We survived then. We'll survive now, Jen shook his head. You have more faith than I do. Maybe, Margaret said. Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. We're in this together, Jen. Whatever happens, we face it together. That night, lying in bed, Jen thought about everything that had happened. He thought about Thomas selling him off in the town square, about Margaret stepping forward when no one else would, about the past month of working together, building something good despite the odds. He thought about the mayor and the deacon, about the boys outside the store, about the rock through the window. But he also thought about Robert Hayes, about Mrs. Liu, about the few others who'd shown kindness. The town was divided. Some people saw him as a problem to be removed. Others were starting to see him as a person worth defending. But which side would win? Jen didn't know. And lying there in the dark that he lived in permanently, he felt more uncertain about the future than he had in weeks. Tomorrow, Margaret would open the store again. They'd work together, organize inventory, help the few customers who still came. They'd keep going because giving up wasn't an option. But Jen couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead of them. The storm was building and soon it would break. He just hoped they'd both still be standing when it passed. Winter came early to Ashford Valley that year. By mid-November, snow had already covered the mountains and ice formed in the water buckets each morning. Jen could feel the cold seeping through the walls of the store, could hear the wind whistling through the cracks around the boarded-up window. They still hadn't been able to afford to replace properly. Business had slowed to a trickle. Some days only 1 or 2 customers came in. Other days none at all. Jen knew Margaret was worried. He could hear it in the way she moved around the store, checking and rechecking their supplies. Could feel it in her silences, which had grown longer and more frequent. But she never complained. Never once suggested that Jen should leave. One particularly cold evening, they sat in the kitchen after closing. Margaret was going through the account books while Jen worked on something he'd started a few weeks back. A piece of wood he'd found in the storage room, smooth and about the size of his hand. His fingers moved over the wood's surface, carving by touch. It was something he'd done before the war, back when he still had his sight. A hobby his father had taught him. He'd picked it up again one restless night, needing something to do with his hands, something to quiet his mind. "What are you making?" Margaret asked, looking up from the books. Jen paused, running his fingers over the carved grooves. "A bird, I think. Maybe a sparrow. Hard to say if it looks right. May I see it?" Jen handed it over, feeling suddenly self-conscious. It was just something to pass the time, probably crude and uneven. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Jen, this is beautiful." "You don't have to say that." "I'm not just saying it," Margaret insisted. "The detail, the texture, it's remarkable. How do you do this without seeing?" Jen shrugged. "I feel the wood, feel where it wants to go, where it naturally curves. Then I just follow what my hands tell me. It's not as good as it used to be, but it's incredible," Margaret said firmly. She turned the carving over in her hands. The feathers, the way the wings are positioned, it looks so real, like it might fly away. Jen felt warmth creep up his neck. He wasn't used to praise, especially not for something he did just to keep busy. "Do you have others?" Margaret asked. "A few," Jen admitted. "Small things. Nothing special. Can I see them?" Jen went to his room and returned with 3 more pieces. A horse mid-gallop, a flower with petals that seemed to unfold, and a small box with a fitted lid, its sides decorated with climbing vines. Margaret examined each one carefully. Jen listened to her soft exclamations, the way her breathing changed as she discovered each detail. "Jen," she said finally, These could sell. Sell? Jin laughed. Who'd buy carvings from a blind man? Anyone with eyes to see how beautiful they are, Margaret said. People pay good money for quality craftsmanship. These are better than anything I've seen in the fancy shops in the city. Margaret, I'm serious, she interrupted. The store needs income. You have a skill that could bring in money.
Why not try?
Jin wanted to argue, to list all the reasons it wouldn't work. But the hope in Margaret's voice stopped him. She was grasping at anything that might save her business, might keep them afloat through the winter. All right, he said quietly. We can try. The next day, Margaret set up a small display in the store window, the one that wasn't boarded up. She placed Jin's carvings on a piece of dark cloth, arranged them carefully to catch the light. For 3 days, nothing happened. People walked by, some glanced at the window, but no one came in. Then on the 4th day, Jin was in the back room when he heard the door open. A stranger's voice, a man he didn't recognize. Those carvings in the window, the man said. Are they for sale? Jin's heart jumped. He moved to the doorway to listen. They are, Margaret said. Hand-carved, each one unique. Who made them? There was a slight pause. Jin knew Margaret was deciding how much to say. My business partner, she said finally. He's very skilled, I'll say, the man replied. I'm a traveling merchant. I go through these mountain towns selling goods, buying local crafts to resell in the cities. I've never seen work like this. The detail is extraordinary. Would you like to see them up close? Jin heard items being placed on the counter. The stranger made appreciative sounds as he examined each piece. I'll take all of them, he said, and I want to place an order. How many could your partner make in a month? Jin stepped out of the back room before Margaret could answer. Depends on the size, he said. Small pieces like these may be 15 or 20. Larger ones fewer. The stranger turned toward Jin's voice. There was a pause as the man took in Jin's appearance, the scars on his face, the way his eyes didn't quite focus. You made these? The stranger asked, surprise evident in his voice. I did, Jin said, lifting his chin slightly. Without seeing? The man's voice had shifted from surprise to amazed. I don't even know what to call that. Incredible doesn't seem like enough. Jin felt his face heat up. Just something I learned as a boy. Something you learned, the man repeated, then laughed. Son, this is a gift. A real talent. He turned back to Margaret. I'll take these four for $15. And I'll pay $30 up front for a month's worth of work. Small pieces preferred, easier to transport and sell. Can you do that? $15. 30 more for future work. Jin's mind reeled. That was more money than he'd seen since before the war. We can do that, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the excitement Jin could hear underneath. The merchant counted out the money, wrapped the carvings carefully, and left with a promise to return in a month. After the door closed, Margaret turned to Jin. He could hear her moving closer, then felt her hands grip his arms. Did that just happen? She asked, her voice breaking into a laugh. I think so, Jin said, starting to smile. $45, Jin. $45. Do you know what this means? Jin did know. It meant they could replace the window, buy supplies, maybe even have something left over for savings. It meant they could breathe again. But more than that, it meant Jin had value. Real value. Not just as someone who could organize a storage room or count inventory. He could create something people wanted. Something worth paying for. That night, Jin worked on new carvings. His hands moved with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. A deer with delicate antlers. A mountain cat crouched to pounce. A child's face, features soft and peaceful. The wood spoke to him in a way nothing else did. Each grain had a story. Each knot suggested a shape. His fingers found these hidden forms and brought them into the world. Margaret sat at the kitchen table watching him work. How do you know where to cut? She asked quietly. I feel the wood's weight, its density, Jin explained, his hands never stopping. Dense spots become the body, the main form. Lighter grain works for details, delicate parts. The wood tells me what it wants to be. I just help it get there. It's like magic, Margaret said. No magic, Jin replied. Just patience and touch. And lots of mistakes along the way. I don't see any mistakes in these. Jin smiled. That's because you don't see the pile of failed attempts in my room. They worked together over the following weeks, developing a rhythm. Jin would carve while Margaret minded the store. When customers came in, she'd show them Jin's work. Word started to spread, not just about the carvings, but about who made them, the blind veteran who created beauty through touch alone. It was a story people responded to, not everyone, of course. Some still avoided the store, still muttered about impropriety when Margaret and Jin were seen together. But others, hearing about Jin's talent, came to see for themselves. One afternoon, Robert Hayes brought his son to meet Jin. The young man was thin, haunted-looking, with the same distant eyes Jin had seen in mirrors before he lost his sight. "This is Daniel," Robert said. "He served in Korea, too. Infantry." Daniel nodded at Jin but didn't speak. His hands shook slightly at his sides. "Jin here does wood carving," Robert continued. "Beautiful work. I thought maybe you two could talk." Jin understood what Robert was really asking. Could Jin help his son, who was clearly struggling with what he'd seen in the war? "I was working on something in the back," Jin said to Daniel. "Could use a second opinion if you have time." Daniel followed Jin to the work area Margaret had set up for him in the storage room. Jin pulled out a half-finished carving of a mountain landscape. "Can't really judge my own work anymore," Jin said, running his hands over it. "Hard to know if it looks right. Could you describe it to me?" It was a lie, of course. Jin knew exactly how the carving looked through his fingers. But Daniel needed something to focus on, something besides the memories Jin suspected were haunting him. Daniel studied the carving. Then slowly he started to speak, describing the ridges Jin had carved, the way the trees seemed to climb the slopes, the suggestion of a valley below. His voice was rough from disuse, but as he talked, some of the tension in his shoulders eased. He picked up a piece of sandpaper without being asked and started smoothing one of the mountain's edges. They worked together in silence for a while. Then Daniel said quietly, "It's hard, isn't it, being back?" "Yes," Jin said simply. "People here, they don't understand. They think we should just be grateful to be home. Go back to normal life like nothing happened." "But normal doesn't exist anymore," Jin finished. "Exactly." Daniel's hands kept moving over the wood. "My pa tries. He really does. But he looks at me like I'm broken. Like I'm not the son he sent off to war." Jin set down his carving knife. "You're broken," he said. "So am I. But broken doesn't mean worthless. Doesn't mean we can't build something new from the pieces we have left." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "How'd you learn to do this?" "The carving? My father taught me before the war. I stopped after I lost my sight. Thought I couldn't anymore." Jin picked up the mountain carving. "But then I needed something to do with my hands. Needed to create something, to prove to myself I could still make something beautiful even in the dark." "Does it help?" Daniel asked. "The creating?" "Sometimes," Jin admitted. "It doesn't fix what's broken. Doesn't make the memories go away. But it gives me something to focus on besides what I lost. Reminds me I can still contribute something to the world." Daniel nodded slowly. Could you teach me?" "To carve, I mean. I need something. Anything to quiet my head." "I'd be happy to," Jin said. And so Daniel started coming to the store several times a week. Jin would teach him basic cuts, how to feel the grain of the wood, how to work with the material instead of against it. It gave Daniel something to do with his shaking hands, something to focus on besides his nightmares. Robert would come too, picking up supplies, watching his son and Jin work together. Once Jin heard the older man's voice crack as he thanked Margaret for what Jin was doing for Daniel. "He's smiling again," Robert said. "I haven't seen him smile in months." But even as some things improved, the shadow of Thomas still hung over Jin's head. He hadn't forgotten about the debt, about the partial payment Margaret had made. He knew Thomas could come back at any time and cause trouble. He just didn't expect it to happen when it did.